This is the Ultrarunning History Podcast. I'm your host, Davey Crockett. Thanks for coming. This is episode 159. In this episode, I will continue the story of Ted Corbitt, the father of American Ultrarunning. This is part 2, which will highlight the rebirth of ultramarathons in the New York City area in the early 1960s, which used to be the world epicenter for ultrarunning in the 19th century. There are now 10 books in the Ultrarunning History series available on Amazon. They tell about a rich history of ultra-distance running for more than 200 years. Get them on Amazon. Search for Ultrarunning History. Davey Crockett.
Will do.
After Ted Corbitt's disappointing 1952 Olympic marathon, he was determined to continue running. His key takeaway was that he had to elevate his performance by running more often and covering greater distances. But as he continued to push his training, he experienced a series of chronic muscle strains for the next year. Corbitt was focused on the marathon distance and continued to finish high each year at Boston. He believed that success would require training every day, reaching at least 100 miles per week. His perseverance finally paid off in January 1954 when he emerged victorious in a marathon held in Philadelphia, completing it in 2:36. He won again at the 1954 Yonkers Marathon, considered the national championship, with a time of 2:46. He had proven that his 1952 Olympic selection was justified. In 1955, he made the team for the Pan American team in Mexico City, but was cut from the team because of the lack of funds. It bothered him that some newspapers listed him as a non-finisher in the race. He never started it. Throughout his long running career, he never had a did not finish DNF. The 1956 Olympics were to be held in Melbourne, Australia during the month of December, which caused alterations in everyone's training calendars. With the goal of making the Olympic team again, he surpassed 5,000 miles in 1956. If the Olympics had been held during the Northern Hemisphere summer, he would have made the team. But after a 6th place finish at the Yonkers Marathon, held during the fall, he fell to the alternate place for the team. Corbitt was obviously very disappointed that he missed being on the 56 team by just one man. Still, he never contemplated quitting running. In May 1956, he set the American record for a marathon on a track with 2:42 in Philadelphia, and became the U.S. national champion at 30 kilometers, repeating that in 1957. Corbitt's future involvement in ultrarunning would take root with the London to Brighton race held in England. Ultra-distance races essentially disappeared during the World War II era. In the late 1950s, the modern era of American ultrarunning gave birth. This was largely because of the efforts of the Roadrunner Club of America, or RRCA, established in 1958, and also because of the efforts of Corbitt. England took the lead in the 1950s to re-establish ultras, and specifically the 50-miler. The London to Brighton 52-miler became an official running race in 1951 with 47 starters. It had been a standard point-to-point challenge for both walkers and runners since the first running race held in 1897. Heel and toe walking races were held for many years on the route during the first half of the 20th century. In 1951, the London to Brighton running race was established by Ernest Neville. It would eventually be considered the de facto world championship 50-mile race for several decades. In England, the Roadrunners Club, RRC, was founded in 1952 by Neville to help promote London to Brighton and to encourage more long-distance running.
The aim of the RRC is to bring together all those interested in the long-distance running, to stimulate interest in our great sport, to serve as a forum for all enthusiasts, and to further the interests of road runners everywhere.
By 1953, London to Brighton got the attention of the leading long-distance runners from other areas of the world, especially among ultra-runners in South Africa who had been running the Comrades Marathon of 54 miles. London to Brighton became the race that the best ultra-runners in the world wanted to compete in. The RRC was an amazing success, and the number of road races in Britain tripled in just a few years. America was much slower to bring ultra-running back from its disappearance during the war years. It first needed to go through England. Ultra-running historian Andy Milroy wrote,
"The London to Brighton race was to be a major catalyst in the development of North America ultra-running."
Amateur distance running athletes who grew up running in high school and college looked to the Amateur Athletic Union, AAU, to provide races, but by the late 1950s it became clear that the organization wasn't really interested in putting on many races, especially races beyond 6 miles. Browning Ross was an important person in re-establishing road ultra-running in America. He was an elite-level runner. In 1951, he won the gold medal in the 1500 meters at the Pan American Games. He also competed in the 1952 Olympics held in Helsinki. In 1956, Ross started publishing a monthly magazine, The Long Distance Log. He published race results and shared news. It had a circulation of only 126 subscribers during the 1950s, but it was the only publication devoted only to long-distance running in America.
The road running community was very small back then, and so information concerning the races was extremely limited. Responding to this problem, in 1957, Browning began publishing a 30-page magazine dedicated solely to running. It was called The Long Distance Log, and was America's first running magazine. Browning wrote and distributed the Long Distance Log from his home in Woodbury. It soon became the chief means of communication among distance runners across the country.
When Ross competed in England, he joined the British Road Running Club and was impressed with the way it brought new life into the sport. Such an organization could also help America. There were only 9 marathons in North America at the time, with only about 300 Americans taking part. In the August 1957 issue of Ross's Long Distance Log, he proposed that a national road running organization be formed, similar to the RRC of England.
"Wouldn't it be great if we could emulate the Road Runners Club of England and institute an organization in the USA with the object of encouragement of running, particularly road running?"
On February 27, 1958, under Ross's leadership, a small group met in New York City to develop the structure for the Road Runners Club of America, RRCA, and how it would work with local chapters. Harry Berkowitz, one of the RRCA founders at that first meeting, later wrote,
"Ross had the foresight to establish an organization to get around the AAU bureaucracy and allow runners to organize races that they wanted to run."
Ross's vision was to provide running opportunities for as many people as possible, and he wanted those people to be involved in organizing of events, not relying on the AAU to do so. The vision paved the way for today's ultramarathons to be organized by local clubs and runners. Local RRCs were organized. John Sterner of the New York Pioneer Club was at that historic organizational meeting. He worked with the Pioneer Club members and asked Corbitt if he would be president of the new New York Roadrunners Club, NYRRC. At first, he was resistant about getting involved in administration, but as the New York runners refused to join the RRCA, Corbitt agreed to be the first president of the New York RRC. In April 1958, the New York Road Running Club was founded by Sterner with 29 members. Ted Corbitt was appointed president. It would be the most influential organization in reestablishing ultramarathons in America.
Ted Corbitt.
He is known as the father of long-distance running.
Corbitt made a name for himself in this park. Originally from South Carolina, he moved to New York for the challenge to make the impossible possible. Corbitt was the first African-American Olympic marathoner and the first president and founder of Roadrunners, the ultimate pioneer in the 1960s.
Soon, there were 6 chapters of the RRCA. Races started to be organized, including national championships for 10 miles, 12 miles, and a fixed time race of 1 hour.
Yeah, my father co-founded the New York Roadrunners Club. He was the first president. The membership in 1959, the first roster was 47 members. New York Roadrunners now is the largest running organization in the world with over 60,000 members.
And it was that was the beginning of the development of road running in the United States. With the institution of the Roadrunners Club, we began to have weekly races. There was an opportunity to race every week. The Roadrunners Club would sponsor a race every Sunday.
On February 22nd, 1959, the Cherry Tree Marathon was organized by the New York RRC. It was named as a celebration of George Washington's birthday and the mythology of his chopping down a cherry tree. This marathon later evolved into the New York City Marathon. The inaugural course ran in the Bronx near Yankee Stadium. Corbitt was the easy winner of the first Cherry Tree Marathon with 14 starters and 17 finishers with 2:38. On March 8, 1959, Corbitt and the New York RRC put on a 30-miler version of the hilly Cherry Tree Marathon, plus 4 miles, as its first ultra-distance race with 14 starters. John Chodes described the course.
It started at Yankee Stadium and winded through the Bronx along the Harlem River. There were numerous joint-wrecking hills, wild downhill stretches, and agonizing right-angle turns. Compounding this misery was the wretched state of the road, an obstacle course of potholes, cobbles, and uneven surfaces.
Corbitt ran the 30-miler and won in 3:04 among 4 finishers. This was one of the earliest modern-era post-World War II road ultras held in America.
I was the first president of the New York Roadrunners Club, which had a little different name. Roadrunners Club New York Association. We set up a program in 1958, our first races, putting on races, and they ranged from short road races up through 30 miles. We had a 30-mile race even in 1959.
In Corbitt's mind, establishing a 30-mile race was the first step toward establishing a 50-miler. He dreamed of breaking the American 50-mile record. During the summer of 1959, Corbitt started publishing a Roadrunners Club New York Association newsletter that came out quarterly.
My father, when the New York Roadrunners Club started, he was the editor of the publication New York Roadrunners Club newsletter, and we printed the newsletter on our kitchen table.
So it's a family
very much,
affair.
very much. And he printed. I would distribute them at races, the major races, and if a runner wasn't at a race, then my mother would send it out to the ones that weren't there.
In the fall 1959 issue, he suggested holding up to 3 races each year of 30 to 50 miles. He called them ultra-long-distance races. But ultra races were put on the shelf for a few years. The 30-miler taught Corbitt that racing past the marathon mark was possible, but to reach 50 miles would require much more work, because near the end of the 30-mile race, his legs stiffened and he became dehydrated because he did not take in fluids as he ran. Still, 50 miles remained the goal. In about 1959, Corbitt coined the term ultramarathon for a race more than the marathon distance. The term had been used before in isolation to help newspaper readers understand that an extra long endurance feat was taking place. In 1977, Jim Shapiro used the term in a widely published article about ultrarunners. It then became a mainstream term. Most ultrarunners of today have been told that the Western States 100 started the belt buckle tradition and awarded the first ultramarathon buckle in 1977. They certainly instilled the long-lasting tradition in the sport, but they did not award the first ultra buckle. Buckles had a long tradition as an award in sports. In the 1920s, buckles were awarded in amateur boxing matches. In 1923 in Sacramento, California, they were awarded to the first 6 runners who finished a cross-city race of 2 miles. During the decades to come, buckles were awarded in football, wrestling, track and field, rodeo, endurance horse riding, and even bowling. In 1959, Corbitt and the New York RRC awarded the first ultramarathon belt buckle to the top 3 finishers of the Cherry Tree 30-mile marathon, more than 18 years before the first buckle would be awarded by the Western States Endurance Run.
Buckle up for safety, everybody, buckle up!
Corbitt continued to compete well in mini marathons. By the end of 1961, he was approaching 50 career marathon finishes. After winning the Shanahan Marathon in January 1962, he set his sights on running London to Brighton in 1963. But then Browning Ross approached him and suggested that he should plan to run the 1962 London to Brighton, held in September, and that he would help raise funds for the plane fare. In Browning's January issue of the Long Distance Log, he put Corbitt on the cover. In the next issue, he wrote,
"The 12th annual open road running race from London to Brighton, England, is one of the world's classic races. I would like to propose that a fund be started to send Ted Corbitt over. I can think of no American runner more deserving of such a trip than the veteran New York Pioneer Club marathoner. $300 would be the minimum plane fare, and we feel sure that our friends in the British RRC would accommodate Ted during his visit."
Reaction to this fundraising effort was positive. Bill Wickland of New Jersey, who had coached Johnny Solo to his 1929 win in the Bunyan Derby race across America, gave high praise to Corbitt.
"After having witnessed a great deal of this longer distance type of running, and also all of Ted's performances in the past 10 years, I feel certain that he is the ideal choice for this race."
The fund-running effort was successful. Browning presented Corbitt with the funds for his plane trip. Corbitt had been doing some long training runs to get ready, including a back-to-back 50-miler on Labor Day weekend. About 2 weeks before the race, he ran a 42-mile training run in 5:04. He wrote that it gave him confidence that he was really ready, and he began to taper.
"I ended training with my legs almost pain-free, in contrast to the problems at the start of intensive training."
Corbitt was featured in the New York Times on September 23, 1962.
"Corbitt is Americans' top hope in the grueling test from London's Big Ben to Brighton."
Fellow New York runner Joe Kleinerman was quoted.
"Even among established U.S. marathoners, few can run the distances Ted is capable of. Why, only last week, he ran 100 miles in 2 days."
Yes, ultrarunning in America had not yet been restored in the modern era. It is amazing to think that 80 years previous, there were dozens of men and some women capable of running 100 miles well under 24 hours, when New York City was the world epicenter for ultrarunning. The American record for 100 miles was 13 hours 57 minutes, set by John Hughes of New York City in 1882. So they were very fast back then. In 1962, the best long-distance runners in America were focused on the marathon distance or shorter, with no interest yet in going beyond. Corbitt would soon change that attitude. After arriving in England in September, Corbitt contacted the RRC for help in finding handlers to ride a bicycle along with him during the race. Legendary 83-year-old RRC founder Ernest Neville visited him, welcomed him to London, and gave him advice about the course. Race day arrived. Corbitt woke up at 4 a.m. and ate bananas, peanuts, and cheese in his room. He then went to the race dressing room and received an enthusiastic welcome from officials. He would be only the second American to run London to Brighton. Tom Ryan, while in the U.S. Army, finished the race in 1955, placing 5th. Checking in consisted of receiving bib numbers for the front and back of his shirts.
There was no pre-race physical examination. Instead, the RRC had a committee to check entries. They rejected 5 entries this year because they found that these men had not trained enough to tackle this event. A physician and an ambulance were in attendance during the race.
The race started with 46 runners on September 29, 1962, when Big Ben tolled 7 a.m. Corbitt started mid-pack, but then accelerated to run with the leaders. At 10 miles, he was just 2 miles behind the leader. At 20 miles, he was in 4th, and he reached the marathon mark in 2:45.
I decided to stay as close to 10 miles per hour as I could for as long as possible.
Each runner had a cyclist handler riding near them. The cyclist could scout out the competition. At the Valley of Shattered Dreams, Corbitt's cyclist urged him on, but Corbitt's quads were screaming and wouldn't let him run faster. Dale Hill appeared at mile 45, the biggest hill on the course. At the top, mile 46.5, he was still in 4th, about 4 minutes behind the leader. On the downhill, Corbitt's cyclist yelled,
"Show me what an American can do. You call that running? My 5-year-old sister can run faster than that."
Corbitt tried hard, but couldn't catch the runner ahead. All the leaders struggled for the last 6 miles. Corbitt finished in 4th with 5:53. He set the record for the fastest newcomer and was determined to return and run faster. Brighton's mayor presented him with the 4th place plaque and a trophy for the fastest newcomer.
Between finishing and the awards ceremony, Ted underwent an amazing transformation. Instead of a shattered runner whose last thoughts were to endure this torture again, he was suddenly filled with renewed enthusiasm. This time, the course mastered him. The next time, he would be running to conquer the Brighton Road.
Well, he didn't do comrades because of apartheid, so he would have. It was an opportunity. You know, he ran a London and Brighton 52-mile race 5 times in the 1960s, and that was the de facto World Ultramarathon Championship because the comrades had, because he couldn't compete there.
Okay.
And he took second there 3 times at London and Brighton.
Corbitt's outstanding performance on the world stage at London and Brighton caused enthusiasm among some Americans to compete in distances greater than the marathon distance. Aldo Scandera of the Metropolitan AAU Long Distance Committee took up the baton and started a program of ultramarathons 30 to 44 miles to be held regularly. Corbitt hoped these races would generate a core of American runners who could compete at a future London to Brighton once they were ready.
These will be invitational races. To receive an invitation, a runner must have proven his ability by running a great many marathons, or he must be approved by the chairman, Scandura.
Several of these races were handicapped races, where starters were given Head Start minutes credit compared to Corbitt, who had no advantage. The first handicapped race in this historic Ultra Series was a 30-miler held at Van Cortlandt Park in the Bronx. Corbitt finished in 3rd place in 3:22, but with the fastest time. The next AAU 30-miler was held 3 weeks later on January 20th, 1963, again in the Bronx. Corbitt again had the fastest time with 3:13. During the hot July summer, a 35-miler was held again in the Bronx. The road was so hot that Corbitt's shoes melted and fell apart. He received a new pair from his 9-year-old son Gary as he passed by his house. He won in 4:34. He had no intention to run London to Brighton in 1963, but headed up a fund for donations to send someone to England. Others did want to go, but as it came closer, he discouraged that idea because he felt that they were not ready and would, quote, get murdered, and needed another year to train. 2 more developmental ultras were held in 1963, a 44-miler in Alexandria, Virginia, and a 30-miler that started at Yankee Stadium. Corbitt won both of them. These races were a successful beginning, but something else caused ultrarunning to explode in 1963. In 1963, President John F. Kennedy unintentionally played a role that provided the spark to ignite interest for ultrarunning both in America and elsewhere, as an article revealed that he issued a challenge to some of his Marine officers to try to cover 50 miles in 20 hours. An Associated Press article published nationwide on February 5, 1963, shared the story of the 50-mile test. President Kennedy never directly challenged the American public to take the 50-mile challenge, but an unexpected 50-mile frenzy swept across America like a raging fire that dominated the newspapers for weeks. Tens of thousands of people attempted to hike 50 miles, both the old and the very young. A small club 50-mile event hiked by high school boys in Maryland took place that eventually became America's oldest ultra, the JFK 50, founded by Buzz Sawyer. Corbitt did not take part in this 1963 50-mile frenzy and concentrated on more serious races, but with the ultras being established in the East and with positive public awareness that venturing past a marathon was possible, the infancy of modern American ultrarunning was ready to take off. A new generation of ultrarunners would enter the sport in the New York City, Philadelphia area that would lay the foundation for the modern era of ultrarunning. Stay tuned for more about Ted Corbitt. With that, this is Davy Crockett, and this is the Ultra Running History Podcast. I hope you run fast and far, enjoy life, get outdoors, and most of all, stay safe and don't take unnecessary chances.